In many ways, the 2019 version of The Lion King is a difficult film for me to review fairly. The original is my definitive childhood classic, that videotape I played so many times that it drove my family insane. This is a story I knew by heart, before forming even really any personal memories. The natural response to such a shameless cash-in on something that I cared so much about is annoyance, but an even more bothersome aspect is I know so much about the original story that I kind of just fill in the gaps on whatever parts the remake lacked. This is rooted in the element that we all noticed from the first trailer. The ads conspicuously avoided showing the animals actually speaking, and it's the words that have plagued every review so far. These animals simply lacked a distinct, emotive visual style. As someone experienced with this story, I could fill in all the gaps of what they were trying to show because I knew how the characters felt, but I can't imagine how this actually came off to anyone who didn't somehow know this story going in. The problem is not solely that the lack of expression fails to sell half of the emotions, but that the voices just rarely seem to line up properly. And yeah, young Simba's voice actor isn't the greatest, but it really doesn't have much to do with the performances. It's just, the mouths don't seem to move properly. This film goes all in on trying to pursue this sense of realism, but that realism seems to be limited in purely capturing lines as if they were these real things. But once you have them speak, you have to make a trade-off. Either you have their mouths move a bit differently because they can't actually speak and they won't be able to make these noises, or you do what they do here, which is they just move with such a limited motion that it doesn't come off as real. There's so many limits that they had to consider here, and they went with the most bland visual option. This underlines what I find most problematic about most of these live-action remakes. They seem to be made with the implicit mindset that the only reasons the original films were made as animated features is because they didn't have the technology to do them realistically in their own time. It treats animation as an inferior medium, as if the story is finally being brought to life by losing as much vibrancy as possible. As much as this follows the plot beats of the original, this remake really fails to capture the spirit of it. That was a film that was constantly in motion. It was never afraid to embrace over-the-top musical numbers, and it filled every single frame with color, no matter how quiet the scene was. This was a film written to take place in a fantastic world, even if it was set with real-world animals. Let's compare the entrance of the hyenas. In the original, they step out from inside of an elephant's skull. The scene is stunning and blunt. It immediately links these characters to the concept of death. In this movie, they simply walk into frame. The characters go through the motions, but there's never any style to it. It kind of reminds me of Zack Snyder's take on the comic book adaptations he does. This film seems ashamed of its more exaggerated origins. The musical numbers are largely embarrassing here. I just can't wait to be king, with Favreau completely refusing to embrace any level of surrealism, simply devolves into Simba and Nala just running alongside a bunch of animals. Then Be Prepared is just completely gutted. He doesn't even seem to try to sing his lines, and it only lasts for like a minute. All Scar does is climb to the top of a rock while the hyenas look on. Meanwhile, Can You Feel the Love Tonight just doesn't work at all without a sense of expression. That whole scene in the original falls back on just these knowing looks between the two, but here they just blankly stare at each other. There's nothing to read into it. The one shining moment is Circle of Life, a perfect showcase for this still actually impressive technological advancement. Even in the original film, the scene was presented from a certain emotional distance before we met any of the main characters, and they're just common animals for most of it. Because it's so rooted in the natural world during most of the scene, it actually fits with Favreau's otherwise misguided style. I have more mixed feelings about the treatment of Timon and Pumbaa. Their dialogue is switched up a bit, and where they used to rely largely on gross-out humor, they now mix in a bit of meta-humor, which kind of comments on this film's relation to the original film. These new jokes actually work pretty well, but the problem is it also adds a certain distance to them from the story. And I also just feel like they kind of gloss over their building relationship with Simba. That is the oddest thing about this film. It adds half an hour to the original's runtime, but it doesn't actually cover any additional ground, sometimes even removing things. How is that possible? Simply put, everything in this film happens slower than in the original. The original was cut with a certain rhythm, a slim film that made every moment count. In this new one, Every single action is drawn out purely for the sake of realism. Favreau apparently hoped to make up for the lack of expression with body language, but nothing really comes through. While the visual effects are stellar, the other technical elements feel phoned in. As with the other Disney remakes I've seen over this last year, it seems to be shot and edited from the most convenient angle possible. For example, in Hakuna Matata, they just kind of end the song with Simba running alongside the others while they're walking through the jungle. They don't do anything but sing and sometimes jump around a bit, but it's all kind of this long take for some reason. These moments carry no real dynamic energy, neither in the movement of the characters or how the film is framing them. The 2019 version of The Lion King is an exercise in how to drain all life out of an animated classic. It's by no means the worst film of 2019, merely dull and pointless, but it might just be the most easily hateable. Its purpose is questionable at best, Disney seeming to misunderstand what actually makes their classic films work. But this isn't a misunderstanding, they're just aware that they don't really have to try all that hard to actually make money off of these films. It's bizarre that a film pushing technical capabilities to this level puts in no actual effort to make proper use of it. Instead, it takes the backbone of the original and skins it down to just basic plot beats, completely losing certain important visual motifs and replacing it with nothing at all. Despite its surface luster, this is a film completely lacking in style. This is Hollywood at its laziest, cannibalizing its own classics and acting as if the most basic visual mimicry can hide the lack of care given to the image as a whole.